I've been a part of the maritime industry for over 10 years now, and during my time at sea on this YouTube channel, I've been able to document so many aspects of a seafarer's life. We've looked at so many things. We've looked at arrivals, departures, hyperlapses, time lapses, my promotion on board, my job on board, my crew, the captains, the chief engineers, the management teams, the parties, the recreation, and the downsides of the merchant navy. But today we're looking at something that we have never ever seen before. Today, we're looking at the life of a seafarer, a real seafarer, somebody whose journey at sea started before he even knew that he wanted to go out to sea. A second-generation seafarer who's written a memoir of his entire time and his entire life that led him to become a chief engineer at sea. It's about time we meet the man behind the pistons. Welcome to a memoir of a chief engineer, which is written by our very own Indian chief engineer. I hope you guys are excited because this book, this journey is more exciting than anything I've ever been able to show you on this YouTube channel. Let's do this. In this video, you're going to hear from the man himself, Chief Engineer Kahlon, the man who wrote this book, the man who wrote his entire experience, who's been on both sides of the coin as the family member of a seafarer while growing up. He's experienced the hardships of life on land, and he's also the man who's now sailing the world as a chief engineer in one of the topmost ranks, in one of the topmost professions, conquering the seven seas. We're going to learn so much about his memoir, and we're also going to learn about his life's journey, the true story about the Shipping Corporation of India, and so much more. I hope you guys are pumped because this book blew me completely away. This is one of the best reads I've had in 2023, and I really hope all of y'all get a chance to learn something today. Okay, so welcome back to the channel. We have Chief Engineer Kahlon, the author of the Memoir of a Chief Engineer, the brand new book about the maritime industry that's pretty much taking this industry by storm today. So Chief, how do you feel? How is it being on the channel today? And I'm assuming this is one of your first videos that you're going to have on YouTube. I'm sure there are going to be a lot more coming in the near future, but how do you feel right now?
Thanks for having me, Nitin. It is wonderful. I've been watching your channel. You make amazing videos. I'm so glad to be here, be given a chance to talk about my book.
I appreciate you being here. I've been reading your book for the last few days. It took me a while to get through the book because it just came by surprise. I mean, I didn't know there was a chief engineer, an Indian chief engineer out there who's writing such an amazing memoir. When you gave me the book, I was already caught up with so many different projects, as you know. I was working on all those videos, and the moment I started reading a book, I just couldn't put it down. It's been magnificent, and there's so much that I've been able to connect to with this book. Considering you yourself are a second generation seafarer, you don't get to see people like that at sea nowadays. I mean, there are not so many of us out there. There's a lot of first generation seafarers who are coming out. There are people who are understanding ships for the first time. So in a lot of ways, when I was reading your book, it actually felt like a lot of experiences that I myself have gone through and couldn't put down. So I'm really glad that you're here myself. Honestly, don't thank me. I think this will do good to my channel more than anything else. It's a privilege to have you.
I'm so glad to hear this from Nitin. It's a privilege, and I'm so glad you liked the book. You immediately connected. Like you said, we are both second generation seafarers, and it was about time that one of us came up with a book. So I'm glad you connected with it immediately. Any seafarer, for that matter, would be able to connect with the book very easily.
This book is going to teach a lot of new generation seafarers about the maritime industry. They're also going to teach seafarers something that we on YouTube, a lot of maritime YouTubers, specifically from India, we exist. We can't show you certain parts of our life because, well, we can't be filming so much. I think if you read a book, you can relate to full-blown experiences because you can take your own time, you can absorb the information, you can imagine things in your own way. When I'm showing you a video of a seafarer, I'm showing you what I want to. I'm showing you what I can show you in those 12 minutes, which works for the YouTube algorithm. But when you make a book out of it, it's a completely different game altogether. And I think on that front, new generation seafarers, people who have been out at sea for the last 10 years, there are a lot of people who I know who have joined the maritime profession and they have nobody in their families from this profession. So for them to go home and have somebody to talk to is hard because not a lot of people understand about life at sea. For them to show this book to their loved ones, to their family members, to their friends will make a big difference because everyone will be able to interpret things in their own way.
That's absolutely right, Nitin. Summarized it so well. This is a book for everybody, not just for the seafarers. It's a book for your families, for your girlfriend, for anybody, for the newcomers who want to get some guidance from this book. And I have written this book in a lot of detail. All the stories are in so much detail that you actually get a feel of being on board a ship. I've connected the eras actually. Look, my father started sailing in 1975. We sailed with him in the 80s. And I started sailing in 2001. I'm still sailing. I've written stories from mid 70s when my father joined sea. Certain parts of it would actually be very surprising to a lot of people. For example, which is actually not even in the book, we did not have passports back then. What I mean is, me and my brother, we were young kids. And we did not have passports back then. Would you imagine? Our names were written in our mother's passport. That was all right. We could go on board. We could travel to all the countries and no customs would bother us. I don't think anybody can imagine that these days, family carriage nowadays especially is very, very difficult now. Difficult in the sense that if a family wants to go on board, they need to have a lot of visas and stuff. And then you never know when you can get in trouble with customs and all.
Couldn't agree more. This is something that I don't think anyone's going to believe for beginners, because it's so unbelievable that you didn't have a passport back in those days. And with respect to family carriage, yes, you're 100% right. What we saw as young seafarers, kids, and what we grew up with, that is something that majority of the seafarers my age and your age today can't provide to their families, because it's practically impossible to take your families out to sea for those many months. Your companies don't allow it for that long anymore. There are stipulations.
No, they don't. No.
If you're joining a ship with as a seafarer and you want to take your family, they'll tell you to do the first 2 months of your contract, and then they'll tell you your family can join you for a month after that, and then you have to do your last month, and then there are wettings and there are inspections, there are requirements, visa requirements, like you said. So it is absolutely not easy in today's day and age to take your family on board. While it's advertised in the maritime industry, take your families on board and travel the world, the reality is it's a whole different story.
Right, you're absolutely right, Nitin. Family carriage was so much different back then, and it was actually a luxury that you could really enjoy. You would have your family, and the crew strength was much bigger that time.
A lot of parts of your book can bring back those memories for a lot of people as well. A lot of senior seafarers who have retired would love to read your book. I need to know, and I think everyone needs to know. We have a lot of chief engineers, a lot of seafarers. India is a very dominant nation when it comes to the maritime industry. But what gave rise to the memoir of a chief engineer? What made you start writing this book? How did this come about?
Well, purely because of the large amount of time that I had on my hand during the corona pandemic in 2020. We were all locked down for several months. Then that's when some of my friends, they brought up this idea that all these cool stories that you tell us about when you would sail with your father as a young kid away from sea only for my schooling, including my brother. My brother is also a master. And right after schooling, we went back to sea. So we had a lot of stories, and people would love them. It wouldn't be a typical, sea book, a bit like a new version of The Old Man and the Sea, if I can say so.
Pandemic started a lot of creative journeys out at sea. This YouTube channel itself started when I was out at sea during the pandemic. I was out for 11...
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I was out for 11 and a half months at a stretch. We were not sure at the 6-month point whether we would get relieved or not. So there was no shore leave. Right. There was no relief. That's when I picked up my first GoPro. It's been a journey that's never ended. So I completely relate with what you're saying. And I've been reading a book for the last few days. You've segregated the book beautifully, in my opinion. There are 3 major parts of the book. If you could give a brief overview on the various parts that the book is divided into, and what your thought process was while building various sections in the book and diversifying the content that you're trying to share with us. If you read, you go from one sphere of life to another sphere, and you break down the maritime industry from the eyes of a child, from the eyes of a seafarer, from the eyes of a father who's now a senior seafarer.
Just for a brief, there are 26 chapters in the book. I've segregated different phases of life and different phases of the book as a matter of interest into 3 sections. So section 1 is about my childhood sailing with my father on board the SCI vessels, and a bit of background. It was very interesting to write about my father, who had overcome all those challenges in a struggling family, the kind of willpower he had to overcome all those challenges. Completed his primary school education, started doing BSc. When he was in the final year of BSc, he happened to meet another gentleman who had done engineering. He said, well, engineering is something that you should get into. It's a very lucrative career. He told my father father where to do it from, the Guru Nanak Engineering College. That's where my father enrolled after the BSc. So he was double graduate even back then in the 70s. It was amazing to write about all his struggles, how an opportunity to join the Shipping Corporation of India came along. It is very fascinating for me to write and even talk about it. So that's part one, my childhood sailing. You see, let me give you a scenario. The 80s India, there was no concept of house architecture, interior designing, or the luxury of having a TV, a telephone, things like that. But when you went on board, this is what you saw. You saw a greatly well-designed cabin, interior designing, gramophones, phones and TV. So it was quite a luxury for a kid of that era to go on board, which is not the same nowadays. Nowadays, if a kid goes on board, probably his house is better than what it is on board. Plus, my growing up years, being in a boarding school, that was a bit of a Fauji school. I got that training in Navy. That sort of training definitely helped. It's a bit of my career starting in part one. It does start because I joined Academy of Maritime Education and Training. And very interestingly, while I was in Chennai, my father got a vessel which was on a regular run to Chennai. Also got an opportunity to sail with him for 2 weeks there. That was very, very interesting, learning straight from my father. This is a dream come true, isn't it? You would agree probably. So it was amazing when I was in Chennai. And my father happened to join a ship which was on a regular run to Chennai, and we would meet every 2 weeks. And I also got a chance to sail with him 2 weeks, and that was it was a wonderful experience being trained directly by my dad. Imagine a trainee engineer getting to live in a chief engineer's cabin. That was really something I could do only once in my lifetime. Yeah. Then part two is about my professional experiences. I start with when I was a trainee marine engineer. Imagine getting your first job, how big a deal it is. You feel on top of the world. And I've thanked especially Mr. Sanjay Shesh and Fleet Management Limited there. They gave me my first job. It was on a chemical tanker. And then I've talked about almost all the ranks: fourth engineer, when I was a fourth engineer, third engineer, second engineer, and when I was also chief engineer. Actually, 3-4 stories when I was a chief engineer. And these stories all where we had some sort of trouble, and it was very interesting to write about them. So I've talked about my second engineer's exam in there. I'm a steam and motor engineer, and I've talked about the kind of work life we had on steamships. Also, I've talked about what we all know what PSC, Flag State Classification Society, what these things are. But just for a better overall understanding, I've written one separate chapter on what these things are and how they control the ships. And then this section actually ends with the vacation time. Again, this is seafarers. It's not just about their sailing time. And people often tell us that you go away from your family and they don't like this part of the profession. But the truth also is that the amount of free time that we have, quality time that we get to spend with our families, that is also that nobody gets that kind of free time. I finished with part 3, chapters 24, 25 and 26. 24 is about British India steam navigation, and it is very important really. I think we all should know where our history comes from when it comes to Indian shipping. It was the British India Steam Navigation Company that started shipping. They did great business. They were sold out, I think, in 1912 or something. That's when it became P&O. Scindia's came along. That's chapter number 25. A lot of people believe that Scindia's is actually, because it is called Scindia's, it is probably owned by the royal family of Gwalior Scindia's. But that's absolutely not the case. Scindia's had nothing to do with, they didn't have a penny invested. And yes. I've also mentioned in that chapter, which to me is of great interest and should be to everybody, the first ever vessel which was entirely manned by Indians was a vessel called SS Jala Gopal. It's of great significance, the first vessel which was fully manned by Indians. Then the third part is the Shipping Corporation India, chapter 26. Interestingly, I could not find any history about Shipping Corporation of India on the internet, not on the Wikipedia. Even if you go on their website, it is just 3 or 4 lines. They haven't got anything more than that. And it took me about 2 months to research and find the history for Shipping Corporation of India. Also, as a matter of interest, the 19 vessels that came under the management of the Shipping Corporation of India. I would be very interested if your viewers can write even one or two names in the comment section. I've got all 19 in my book, including their photographs. Some were steam and some were motor. So there's quite a history about the Shipping Corporation of India. SCI has a huge role to play in giving Indian seafarer a reputation that it has today, because they were the first platform.
I think the growth of Indian seafarers comes from the Shipping Corporation of India and SENHEISSER, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely.
I knew a lot about SENHEISSER, but I had no idea about all the details that you have put in your book regarding the Shipping Corporation of India, especially about the various branches of the corporation. Like, that is something that you just do not hear about. I love seeing the photographs of the ships that you have put down. The amount of detail that I found in your book, I haven't been able to find in a lot of spaces and in a lot of manifests and a lot of write-ups about the maritime industry. I mean, if you could go to the SCI building in Bombay and people couldn't be able to tell you these things. I don't know if a lot of people will actually say this or not. As a maritime professional yourself, the inclination for you to consume maritime-based content is very, very low, and that's a fact of life. For me, there are very few people who I would watch who are creating maritime-based content, unless their content was actually drop-dead gorgeous or they were showing us something that was super informative that I don't know about. There's a lot that I don't like watching because I experience that on a day-to-day basis, and one of the main spaces where as a seafarer we consume content is when we are home, because the lack of internet facilities when we're out at sea. Right. And when you're home, a lot of seafarers want to detach from ships. So one of the main reasons a lot of us end up like not watching maritime-based content is because the hardships that come with the industry and you want to disconnect. Now there has to be something really special for a seafarer to get hooked to anything related to maritime when it comes to social media, when it comes to YouTube videos, documentaries and books, as a matter of fact. You need something that's different, that's out of the ordinary. But your book gave us so much detail and so much insight, and that's highly underrated in today's market. And I think that's something that goes a very, very long way. And for this year, so far, it's one of my favorite books that I've read.
Thank you so much, Nitin. And if I can add to what you've just said, you see, any book that you read about seafaring, especially by the famous journalists, or if you watch a movie, invariably about a sinking vessel. We all know that sinking is not something that happens every day. I mean, the hard work and the kind of pressures that we work under, that also needs to be appreciated. In my stories, I have tried to reveal all of what I've just said now. When you read my story, it will also play out in your mind as well. You'll feel as if you're on board.
You were probably not going to be a seafarer if it was up to your father, similar to something that I went through. I was never encouraged by my dad to go out to sea. He always wanted me to study harder and pick up a different profession. From your book, I've also learned that it was very similar for you. So how did that play out in your life?
As kids, I went to school, even my brother, we went to school from the 4th standard. So that would be a bit of a surprise because that doesn't happen today. We were mostly homeschooled. What I mean is we were mostly on board. When we came back, we did join a school. When I started from the 4th standard, I'll be honest, I was academically very weak. I was just an average student, and that's how I remained for the most of my life. Academically, I wasn't did very well. I was more interested in sports and all of that. I only started focusing, I don't want to give a wrong impression that I never cared about studies. You start in 4th standard, that is already a certain level, and you've missed a lot of the basic foundation. By the time I was in 9th standard, I'll be honest, I was down to maybe 40 to 45%. 10th standard, I knew that this wouldn't suffice. I had to do something about it. And that's when I seriously started focusing more on it. Past 10th with a decent score, I was around something 65% or something. January 1997, a cousin of mine, he met me. I had come from my boarding school for a few days vacation, 4 days or something. And he asked me, what is your ambition? And I told him quite frankly, I thought for a second, looked my eyes going somewhere, and then I told him I don't have an ambition. He was quite disappointed to hear that. When it came to choosing subjects, the stream in 11th standard, obviously I didn't know which one to choose, and obviously someone who's academically just an average, he should not be going for non-medical or medical. Everybody seemed to be under the impression that's where most of the jobs are. I completed my 12th in 99. After that, I was preparing for some competitive examination. But one Sunday, I just was bored with studies, and I thought I'll read a newspaper. And quite surprisingly, that day they had an article on the turbine tanker TT Jahare Viking, the biggest vessel in the world. One of the seafarers from Chandigarh, he had sailed on it. By the time I finished reading that article, I was quite overwhelmed. I wanted to be on that vessel actually. I told my mother about it. My mother did hear me, but my father was away. He called in the evening. That's when I didn't expect, because all our life he had always dissuaded us from going to sea. He thought, like every parent would want a comfortable life for his child. My mother told him that that's what he's saying. He wants to join sea. To his surprise, he immediately said, "Why not? Yeah, he can go to sea." And then he guided me. He spoke to some of his. He asked me rather, "What do you want to do? Do you want to go to the deck side, or you want to be an engineer?" And I had always been very impressed with my father's personality when I had sailed with him when I was young. I wanted to be a chief engineer, and that's what I told him. And then somebody suggested going to the Academy of Maritime Education and Training, who were conducting this marine engineering program, H&D Marine Engineering. So that's how shipping happened to me.
To be fair, I already was aware of this story because I've read your book and I know what went down and how it played out. And the reason why I brought this up was because it was very similar to what I wanted to do. For my entire life, at least the last few years of school, just like you, I was not somebody who was super academically inclined. There was a point where I was in the 11th. I chose science because my friends were doing science. My best friend and I decided that we don't want to do that, and we thought about becoming airline pilots. Again, my dad also wasn't somebody who was enthusiastic about me going out to sea. Looking at the job market, I was influenced by another captain, a very senior person from Zealandia Ship Management. He was one of the partners of Zealandia. And I just looked at my dad and said, okay, maybe I'll join the Merchant Navy. And that was it. Let's talk about the short sail of 2 weeks that you did with your father on the ship that was doing the Chennai run. That's something I envy you for, because I always wanted to sail with my dad.
Thank you.
Never got the opportunity to do that. Any particular moments from that time that you can tell us about? Please go ahead.
Well, like you said, I also felt really proud when I went on board, knowing that my father was the chief engineer of the vessel. I really felt very proud. Also, because I had already started studying marine engineering, and I was, how good can it be? It's so wonderful for somebody who's studying, and then he gets a hands-on experience to go on board. And then someone, your dad, for example, who would give you all the details, all the inputs, and he would want you to be the best. So that ship actually is very important to me. It's not out of my CV, actually it's part of my CV. I was a supernumerary as well as a trainee engineer there on the deck and the engine. Everybody was very friendly to me. They always wanted to guide me. One thing that stands out to me, old school sailors. I met a lot of them on those ships. My dad was also an old school sailor. And I think most of the people on that ship were old school sailors. And when I went around with the motormen around the engine room, they strongly emphasized on watch keeping, draining the settling tanks, draining the air reservoirs, and taking the pains to check the sump levels and all that. Nowadays, it's all automatic, and one can have this tendency to be a bit slack. But if you value that basic watch keeping, where you go from the tunnel to the funnel, checking every detail, pressures, temperatures, the levels, I think you are as good as gold. And that was my key, very valuable, that I got from my sailing with my father. A dream come true, really. Like you've said, you've also wanted to do this.
I can totally imagine, and really, I mean, even today, I would love to go out to sea with my dad. Of course, I know he would probably kick me around a lot. That's just the way old school seafarers were. Like, I think we, being the slightly younger generation, we're not as strict when it comes to a lot of things, and we let things pass by. But there was one word that we can say for the old school senior officers specifically: it's perfectionists. It is what it is. You do what is required, and if you do anything less, you're probably going home, or you're probably doing a lot of overtime, and there's just no questions about it. So I think those experiences that you gain when you sail are fantastic. I remember I was a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. I've sat on the bridge with a binocular and I've looked out, keeping lookout. I mean, looking back at it now, I understand the gravity of that, but at that point I didn't. And to assume those roles and responsibilities under your father would have been mind-blowing. Like, I think it's very cool. Easier said than done. It is a hard job, and I mean, if you join a ship today, one of your seniors is going to come up to you and tell you that, listen, you have to enjoy the work, and that's what it is. You don't get internet here, and this is your life. And it's a lot to absorb, considering you're coming from a world that we're currently living in. But to be honest, our forefathers did it, our seniors did it. The industry is built with professionals who have done it, and the industry is built off of the fact that we didn't have internet, we didn't have communication. I think that's something you've experienced as well, not being able to talk to your dad for months at a stretch. And it is something you've also highlighted in brief in the book, where you explain the communication barriers and how it was growing up. And that's something as YouTubers we can't show. You're a subscriber today of this channel and you're watching this video. If you really want to know the reality of life at sea, the harsh truth of life at sea, where your loved one or you might join a vessel and you might not have internet. It's 2023 and it's unbelievable, but it's possible. You will understand what it is to be a family member. So a lot of times, a lot of seafarers who are on board will complain about how their wife is giving them trouble, or how their girlfriend is giving them trouble, or how they are not be able to speak to their brother and their brother was upset because you couldn't wish him on his birthday. There's a lot that the family members of a seafarer also go through that we as seafarers need to understand. I think that's highlighted beautifully in your book, and it's a perspective that we don't understand because we are working out at sea, and every seafarer has this standard perspective that, but I'm working, so like you can't hold it against me if I couldn't call you. That's my job. Two sides to every coin. We do need to understand how difficult it is for our family members to adjust to life at sea. That's given beautifully in your book. Your whole family is going through it. Your brother's a captain and he's currently sailing still, if I'm not wrong.
That's
so
right, yeah.
you, I do believe there's a very interesting story about your brother, about how he got selected in the company that he's currently working with, which is a massive company. It's Dynagas. Would you like to tell everyone about this? I think it's a very cool story. Everyone should know about it.
Nitin, my brother was sailing as second mate with this company called Varun Shipping, and he was on leave. While my father had signed off from some place in China, and for some reason he missed the flight, and it was late night in China. Although the agent would have handled everything, but when my father called home, he spoke to my brother and told him that if he could call Dynacom, it was Dynacom that time, the Dynacom head office in Greece, and tell the HR manager about the delay. The flight is going to be rearranged and all of that. My brother called up and spoke to the HR in Greece, and he told him quite accurately about the entire situation. And she was quite impressed, and she asked him that how come you are able to express this situation so accurately. It seems as if you are a seafarer yourself, the kind of terminology that he was using. And he said, yes, I'm a seafarer too, and I'm working as a second mate with Varun Shipping. And then she said, what kind of ships are you working on? And he said, I'm working on an LPG carriers. And that's when she said that we are going to, our company Dynagas are going to be floating recruitment advertisements very soon, and we are taking LNG carriers and all of that. Would you be interested? And how lucky a chance would that be? We all know how rewarding a career on LNG carriers today is. And I think my brother was one of the first recruits in Dynagas.
That's fantastic. Firstly, the way your brother was recruited is something that is pretty much also unheard of. 80% of the people or 90% of the people who watch this channel would have never gotten the opportunity to experience something like that in their life. Coming back to your brother, you have a family of 3 seafarers. So the environment at home must be fantastic when all 3 of you are sitting together. It's normal, even if you have a group setting and you put 2 seafarers into that group setting, those 2 seafarers are in a world of their own, talking about things that nobody around them will understand, and quite frankly they're not bothered either whether people around them understand or not. So how is the entire family dynamic when your dad, your brother and you are sitting together, because you all have a wife and you'll have kids, and I'm sure extended family is a part of it, so like I'm sure it's a whole fun situation to be around, and just watching you all will be very different to anybody else who's on land.
It is, we have a very strong bond between all 3 of us, and our dad has been a role model to us, and he also takes a lot of pride. Me and my brother, our most cherished memories, to be honest, are still the ones that we had when we were kids. This is what I've described in a lot of detail in the second chapter. When we were on board MV Samrat Ashok, that's the vessel we have the strongest memory of. SEA used to be very luxurious back in the days. The kind of meals they would serve, the etiquettes, and evening pudding culture, which is non-existent in companies at all nowadays, where on a Sunday the pudding used to be an ice cream, half chocolate and half vanilla. We would eat away the chocolate portion and then add some jam to it, mix it up with the vanilla, that would make a very exciting flavor.
Right, I read about that in your book, and I was smiling throughout that entire chapter. As a matter of fact, I read about your first sail, how you explained how your father was very particular about how you have to have all your meals in the mess room. So that's something that I also experienced as a child.
And also the etiquettes, holding the fork in the left hand, knife in the right hand, and finish up chewing before you get out of your seat, and then also greeting everybody, which is normal thing, but he was very particular that we greeted everybody in English, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever. A lot of this is lost at sea today.
It is, yeah.
I can say that for a fact. I think your brother who's still sailing can attest to that as well. A lot of this is lost at sea. A lot of this culture is gone now. Like you said, your father always inculcated the habit where you had to go down to the mess room, be a part of that evening session. That is something that I've experienced as a child as well. I mean, obviously, being captain's son or being chief engineer's son, you have the messman who comes and lays the table in your cabin if you require it. And
That's right,
we
yes.
have had our moments where I've had pizza delivered to my cabin in the middle of the ocean with a glass of juice and dessert, and it's been, I mean, it's royal treatment in its own way. But in order to get that kind of treatment, absolutely, in order to get that kind of treatment, you have to maintain a certain level of decorum on vessels, which you don't have necessarily throughout the industry at this point. And that is something that I did get to experience with my dad. I took it very seriously because obviously, like you said, your dad was your role model. Mine is too. Even today, my dad's still sailing, and there are times where I'll just call him up, and he's never been on a tanker ship. He's always been a dry ship master. And there are times where I'll call him up and I'll just talk to him. I'll just bounce off my ideas off of him, and I've just become mate. It's been only one contract. So obviously my first contract as mate was, you have to have nerves of steel, and there's always something going through your mind, and you're always thinking about possibilities, and your mind is racing. And there were times that I would just call him up and talk to him about stuff that he's probably never done because he's never carried liquids as cargo. But just because he's my dad and because he has that behind him, that experience behind him, it's just, it's and like there's a lot that you've explained in your book, which I read about, which I think even a couple of my batchmates, now we've been sailing for 11 years, a lot of my batchmates have no idea about those things that you've written in your book, because none of them have been at sea at that point. None of them have heard of these things. I know the first thing when you hear about a maritime based book, and this is for all the subscribers who are watching, you're going to wonder why. And like I said, consuming maritime content is something that you're very selective about as a seafarer who's spent about a decade out at sea at this point. But things like this, you have seen in the Titanic. You've seen the decorum in that movie. And that is one movie that you've seen, and you have a vivid imagination. But taking a cruise ship factor, all the luxury that you have there, and how life used to be out at sea at that point, converting it to a cargo ship is what you can experience through this book. And that's something that I absolutely loved when I was going through this entire book, and I cherished everything that you've written down. It's been truly mind-blowing. You'd already sailed with your dad numerous times, and you also sailed as a junior engineer, as a trainee engineer while you were doing your pre-sea training with your dad. Then one fine day you joined a ship as a trainee engineer of your own, and that very moment must have been life-changing. If I'm not wrong, there is a feeling that creeps in. I mean, when you're joining a ship as a new generation seafarer who's never been out to sea before, you're completely blank. That you feel, rather. One is fear, because you're looking at this mega structure, seen it up close. And you've studied about it, and the general trend in every maritime-based institute is to come up to you and tell you that you're going to die on your first ship, and you will probably die if you make a mistake, or you'll sink the ship, and you'll create a complete disaster if you don't do it this way, or you don't follow this rule. And the other feeling that you feel is this feeling of expression that you gain in that moment, is the expression of being wowed by the structure that you're looking at in front of you. See a ship. You're looking at people on a ship, and you've probably been longing to see that. But what you don't get is something that you have probably experienced, which is you grew up around ships. You experienced the luxurious part of that lifestyle. You understood the value of what ships are. You got to be on that ship as a trainee engineer while you were learning about ships to become a professional on it. And then one fine day, everything that you knew, everything that you anticipated was stripped away from you, and you were put on that ship without your dad, without the backlog, without everything that you've seen. That feeling must have been insane, and I can only imagine. And if you could build on that a little bit.
I'll again repeat myself. I just can't be thankful enough to Mr. Sanjay Shesh and Fleet Management Limited. They gave me my first job. Before that first vessel, all my sailing had been as a supernumerary. So I was always pampered, and so it was a huge transformation. Suddenly, I wasn't pampered, now I was a fifth engineer, a trainee engineer suddenly. But my father had prepared me quite well for it. He had told me all about it, how to conduct myself as a trainee engineer. He had told me to respect and value the crew very much. He said that's where you're going to get your basics from. Go around with them. Learn basic seamanship. They really have the seamanship. Officers do not have as much seamanship as the crew has. If I can also say, he also said that they really have a bigger role in running a vessel, and that's where you should start. You should start with them, and they're also a bit rugged. That will condition your mind and body. Again, this is something the younger generation could take note of. That when you go on board, it's a very hands-on job, and the first thing that you should do is, your seniors will obviously tell you, your second engineer or a chief mate will tell you, the first job most likely is going to be cleaning, painting, helping the crew. And you shouldn't be reluctant to do that. A trainee should be willing to jump into anything that needs doing. When you start with those jobs like that, really get a feel of the vessel, and you really need a feel of it before you start fixing it. So that conditions your mind and body. It's just like what happens in the military. People who join NDA, they're trained trained by petty officers, who are not as kind or so, they treat them quite harshly. But that's the only way to train. They need to start with the basics and train harshly. That shouldn't be a problem. So my first vessel was all about it. The pampering was all gone, and I had to do the trainee marine engineer jobs. I had to do all the basic things. Obviously, I didn't like it. It was hot and noisy, and you need to self-motivate yourself. You will and start learning your job. And once you start learning the job, you really enjoy it. It's the same for a trainee engineer or a cadet, And funnily enough, after a few months, these kids who didn't like being on board, suddenly they think they're better than their superiors. You would agree to me, wouldn't you?
I completely agree. I've also been in a similar situation with my first joining of the ship, and I think the key thing over there is you're stripped of all your privileges the moment you set foot on a vessel. This is life at sea. Like, this is what you mean by...
So that probably was your first lesson,
That was my first lesson.
Between professional and personal, yeah.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why I brought it up with you in this conversation, because from what I read in your book, you've also experienced a lot of similar moments out at sea growing up, where there has definitely been a transition for you. And I mean, to go from supernumerary to chief engineer, it's a whole mega transition of life. So yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of marine engineers who watch Life at Sea content on YouTube, and a lot of them have asked me to do an engine room tour. And for all of you guys, there's a lot that you can learn from this book in itself without actually watching a video, because there's a lot that will be relatable to you, which is to things that you've actually experienced. And that's something that no matter how many engine room tours I make for you or how many interviews I do for you, it's just not going to translate through video. Be able to just correlate to your own experiences is what makes this book special and why I enjoyed it a lot.
That's what I would like to say. My book is it's not like a technical journal or a textbook. It's not. Yeah.
Coming to the incidents that you have narrated, one incident that stayed back with me, one of these moments or these super cool stories that we're talking about right now, is how you were blacked out at sea for 21 days. And correct me if I'm wrong, you went through a lot. You've been blacked out at sea for 21 days. Yeah. You had a rescue boat lowering incident that went completely wrong. Crazy things that's happened. Blacked out in the middle of the ocean for 21 days to not having your passport when you were joining a ship, and somebody had to come up to you and give you that passport. Give the viewers a little bit of a snippet.
Yeah, definitely, Nitin. These are actually two different stories. Blacked out 21 days is a different story, and rescue boat lowering gone wrong is a different story. I'll talk about the 21 days blacked out first. So this was a chemical tanker that I was joining. This was some Hong Kong based company. I go to their Hong Kong office. I meet this technical manager. He was juggling between his job and the superintendent's job because their ships were not very kept up. He couldn't retain superintendents. So he was doing both the jobs, and plus he had some communication issues with the management on board. So he didn't have a lot of details, so it was very little he could tell me about it. When I reached the airport, I must have been a little bit stressed or something, tired or something, I don't know. But at the security, I had taken out my passport and the CTC, and I left them. I forgot to pick them up, and then I went sat gate waiting to board the aeroplane. And there was another passenger sitting next to me, and we were chatting. It was normal conversation until somebody, he came and sat on the next chair. And he was looking, and I thought there was something. When I asked him, he said, "Can you see where your passport is?" And then I looked. I thought I had it in my pocket. So I reached for it. It wasn't there. A bit of panic set in that time. So I quickly looked into my bag as well. It wasn't there. And then fortunately he took it out of his pocket and he said, "Well, here's your documents. You had left them at the security screening." So that was very fortunate to have got my documents back. And then being on board that vessel was quite an experience, something that I don't actually regret. It was tough, but that's what that's what builds your character. That particular vessel, we had two diesel generators, auxiliary engines. Normally we have 3 of them, but that vessel had a CPP, controllable pitch propeller. So this was a man-made W engine. It seems to be a thing in the chemical tankers. And it was also coupled to a shaft generator. So shaft generator and 2 that's right, yeah. So a shaft generator and 2 diesel generators, that makes it 3. But the problem on this vessel was we didn't have sufficient spares to maintain these diesel generators, and one of the spares that we badly needed was the filters for the lubal filters. The situation became very bad where we couldn't just run the generator for more than a couple of hours or 3 hours. Then one generator failed a few days after. The other generator also failed, and we ended up in a blackout because we couldn't. You can't just run the main engine coupled to a shaft generator all the time. When this happened, we was headed towards some port in Africa. That's when we called up the head office and told them that this is our situation. We diverted to Lagos, informed the charters as well. And that's where our really struggle started. When we reached the anchorage, we really thought they would be helping us all, giving us all the help, because it is quite a serious situation now. But that wasn't the case. We were totally blacked out. It continued for 21 days. It was hot, humid. We were sleeping outside. We couldn't maintain any hygiene for the first day because we didn't have any water. We couldn't wash our faces, shower or anything. And next day that actually became a priority with some Jimmy fix. We got the hydrophore pump going and a few other things, essential things, hot plate and some things going. But it was only a small plate that we could get going. And then we would only eat, bread and jam or maybe egg occasionally. But we didn't have any supply of provisions. We ran low on water. So it was quite a struggle for 21 days until they gave us all the spares. I would really like the folks to read this story because it's just too lengthy for me to talk about it in this video. One struggle, that's just fascinating. And I have 4 or 5 similar stories. We were adrift at sea for 10 days. And then there was another time during a UMS, when we had lost control over the main engine. So we had lost command really. These stories are quite cool. And, you really get a feel of these stories when you read the book. And then the other story that we talked about, rescue boat lowering gone wrong. That was, LNG vessel, and we were going from, I think from Bonny Island in Lagos. We were going to some port in Europe, Montour, I think. And this rescue boat, this routine rescue boat testing that we are supposed to do. Somebody came up with an idea. He had read in Solas or somewhere that you can actually launch the boat at a speed of 5 knots or something. Came up that okay, let's do it at 5 knots. These things are bookish things, and in practice obviously we don't do these things. We launch rescue boats or the boats at anchorages or something. This time we did. The vessel was still underway, and when we lowered the boat, because of the wake, the bow of the boat lifted. There was one mate in the boat and 2 AVs sitting with him with the life jackets. And when the bow of the boat lifted, obviously the mate wanted to even keep. He moved the throttle for more fuel to the boat, and that's when the boat jumped over the wake. And that jump was so strong that one of the AVs, who must have been more than 100 kgs, he was actually launched into the air. And then because of this, suction, there was water flowing under. He got sucked under the vessel, but luckily he came out in the aft. He was unharmed, but obviously scared. And MOB had been launched, and we also threw the life buoys and all. Boat battered against the ship's hull. The boat's hull was also damaged. The electricals were damaged too. Then finally, the mate did manage to get free from the falls. Just halfway, because these guys had drifted far off, and just halfway towards them, the boat caught fire because of all the water getting into the electrics, causing a short circuit. So he couldn't use his engine, but he was drifting towards them. He got near one of these guys. That guy came on board, and then he used a bit of steering, got the other guy also on board. So all 3 of them were safe from the vessel, obviously. They lowered the starboard side lifeboat, reached to these guys, towed them back onto the vessel. Very scary. Something you never want at sea.
Simple routine drill that has just gone wrong, and I was also taken by surprise because there are people who are out at sea for 30 years, or 25 years, or 28 years, and they never experience anything like this. There's a lot of people who get frightened when they join their first ship and never go back to sea, but there's people like you who are out at sea after going through whatever they've gone through, and they're proud of what they've seen, and they've written a book. And correct me if I'm wrong, the aim of the memoir is to inspire people to go out to sea, and to inspire and make them understand that there are 2 sides of every coin. And that's what I got. And I think every time you read a book, everyone's perspective on the book is extremely different. But this is what I got, and this is my perspective on your book, on the memoir. If there is something from your vast experience at sea, any advice that you could give younger generation seafarers, people who are joining as GP rating, people who are joining as deck cadets, people who are joining as junior trainee marine engineers?
I think I've covered as far the advice goes, I've covered that, it's a very hands-on job, and one needs to be mentally prepared and not be shy of indulging in the kind of jobs that the basics that you should start with. I think I've already covered. But another important aspect of a seafarer's life, and that will help him grow in his profession and help him, solve troubles is troubleshooting. Any department, no matter what rank you work in, you will get loads of troubles from time to time. And how to go about solving them? Not a straightforward, this equals to this sort of idea. The answer really lies in the technique how to find faults, and you can only analyze well when you have strong basics. Follow the procedure one by one, and that's how you find faults. Reading the manuals on board comes into it, paying attention to the manufacturer circulars, building good teamwork, taking advice from everybody. So all those things, all these things come under good seafarer should have these good traits to build up good troubleshooting skills in him.
I completely agree. I guess learning how to read a manual will get you a long way in this profession, because that's exactly why we have so many of them on board. And like you said, it's going to make you much better at troubleshooting because you understand the bare bones of everything that you're doing.
That's right, yes.
And I guess we've covered majority of the parts of your book at this point. There's another last question that a couple of seafarers, junior seafarers have asked me, which I think you'll be the right person to answer, because my career has basically been built around chemical tankers. I started off as a chemical tanker hand as a cadet, and I'm here now as chief mate, and I don't think I'm going anywhere. But a lot of seafarers come and ask me which ship is the right ship to sail on, what kind of ship should they be sailing on, and where their career is going to go ahead. And as far as I've understood from the conversation that we've had, you have experience on practically all kinds of cargo ships. You've sailed on majority of them. So if a young generation seafarer wants an answer to that question, what's your take on it?
I wouldn't say any one type of ship is better than the other. All type of ships have challenges of their own. And as long as you have a job, I think that's brilliant. That's great. You should respect all kinds of ships. All my experience I've built on different kinds of vessels. They all have different challenges. I mean, a tanker man may not be very successful on a cargo ship, and somebody from a cargo ship may not be very successful on a tanker as a tanker man. I think I value all kinds of ships, and I wouldn't put any kind of vessel down.
It comes down to what you get, what you can do, and if you can diversify, you diversify. If you can't, stick to your line. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any line of ships that you're working on. I think that pretty much covers the entire memoir of a chief engineer in short. There's so many details that we're missing out on, but this video is already extremely long. It's turned into more of a live stream, and that's what we're going to use this as. It's going to be more of a live stream for everyone to see a conversation between a chief mate and a chief engineer. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really appreciate Chief Engineer Kahlon for giving me this opportunity to shoot this video. Thank you for sharing your book with me in advance, because it's been one of the best parts of my vacation this year. It's been a fantastic read. And if you're anybody who's looking at joining the maritime industry, or you're part of the maritime industry, or you're a veteran who's retired from this industry, this is a book that's going to bring you memories. It's going to bring you knowledge. It's going to bring you information. It's going to give you insights into the field that you probably never had the opportunity to get because of various reasons. So definitely do check out this book. I think it's mind-blowing. And follow Chief Engineer on Instagram. I'm going to leave his handle down here. I'm sure he would love to answer any questions regarding the maritime industry as well. So do send him a DM, and he'll respond to you as soon as possible. Chief, you have anything else to add?
Nothing else. Thanks for having me, Nitin. It's been wonderful talking to you, somebody from second generation. I hope it inspires a lot of not just the second generation seafarers, a lot of the seafarers to write their own stories. It could be a memoir, it could be anything. But I would love to read. I would love if this book inspires somebody else to write something about himself.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. Thank you, and we'll connect in the near future.